So now we can start with the Q&A session with all the speakers of this second, let's say, part of the morning. So I invite you to turn on the webcams. And the first one is, I'm still not sure that all of the speakers are there. Yeah, I see Domagoj. The first questions are for you. First one, are you considering to compare the people's opinion from country and remote places versus cities? So urban versus, let's say, rural populations.
Thank you. Okay, so every survey that we do, we have, as part of the socio-demographic questions, we have the urbanization, and also in the Eurobarometer, we have this thing called subjective urbanization, when people say if they come from a rural village, from a small mid-sized town or large town. And also we have a geographical location of users for some of the surveys, so we can do the analysis. We do the analysis for all the elements that I shown in the targeting. So, for example, for trust, knowledge, perception, and source of information. However, we didn't find significant differences between rural and urban that would make us target in the You Choose Safe Food campaign, at least, specifically people based on whether they live in a small village or a town. However, if you read the Eurobarometer report, for example, you will see that we try to run all the socio-demographic characteristics through all the questions to see if for any question we see significant differences. And for example, in the Eurobarometer, for the question on information sources, there was a difference between rural and urban. So for example, our people living in the urban area were more likely to use internet search engines than people use in the rural area, whereas the use of TV in the rural area was even higher than in the urban area. So these are just some of the examples, but we do consider this. But as per the targeting model I explained, it's a side analysis which we run always, and then we take action in communication only if there's a difference.
Thank you. Another question for you. Would it be possible to add online focus groups for non-European Union countries?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so let's maybe three things to answer. So first of all, actually this year we have, in addition to the EU countries, EFSA has all the pre-accession countries that are benefiting from the IPA instrument. They're part of observers of our advisory forum and the communication expert network. So for example, and they participate in planning and joint coordination and communication. So this year, North Macedonia, for example, joined the campaign. It's a somewhat lighter approach than the full-blown campaign, but they have joined. So in this case, if we expand the campaign to a non-EU country, it would be a non-EU country which is from the list of IPA countries, and then they could benefit from. There could be a focus group for the campaign. We also did the Eurobarometer study for the IPA countries back in 2020. And we've just repeated the study now. So we will be publishing this in December for 7 countries that benefit from the instrument. That said, if the speaker or the question, whoever posed the question, is interested in designing an online focus group and lives in a non-EU country and would like to have us help with the design or give some tips, we are more than happy and can be contacted to share some of the design of our online focus groups to help the design. Thank you, David.
Yeah, right. So now a couple of questions for the second presentation's speakers. First one, do you know any other podcasts, YouTubers and so on who talk about these topics?
Yes, hi, can you hear me? Yes, seems that works. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Actually, yes. Well, you see, yes and a no, let's say, in the sense that we think that we cover a very, very niche, let's say, topic. So obviously, as you know, the podcast market right now is quite saturated, especially in English language. However, for what we do is very, 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 very particular, right? And it's not just food safety, it's the scientific assessment of food safety. So we don't, for instance, go into giving recommendations to consumer unless, you know, it's something very general. That's normally food risk managers. Having said that, when we started the project and then regularly. We obviously had we look around, and we've seen some examples that inspired as well our work. I have already mentioned, for instance, the podcast that the European Centre of Disease Control and the podcast of the European Chemicals Agency, those sister agencies, European agencies, are doing. They cover some of the topics we also cover. Let's say, for instance, for ECDC, talk also about avian influenza. You can find some episodes on that. ECHA, they cover, for instance, contaminants, which is a topic we also are going to discuss soon in our podcast. So I will really invite you to give it a go if you are interested in those topics. But then outside the, let's say, the European cosmos, by the way, you also can find some examples from the European Commission on Food. We have also seen some other examples that we actually have contributed or collaborated to. For instance, we have a Science Versus, which is a Spotify original podcast that we have recently had one of our experts at EFSA talking to them. I think the episode has not been just aired. This is kind of a scoop for the audience here today. And then we have other ones that I will invite you also to check, like for instance, IEC Food, Il Futuro del Cibo, which is the future of food podcast, or we did some collaboration, for instance, with Feed Info, or, for instance, the Agri-Food podcast produced by Euractiv, which is a pan-European media. It's also quite interesting. We have collaborated with them in different topics on several occasions. Yep, I would say that's some good examples.
Thank you. Another question for you. Most of the time, listeners of the podcast have already a high interest, knowledge, and awareness on the topic. So how EFSA is, let's say, considering to include other communication media, like social media, like Instagram or Twitter, to, let's say, reach the audience that might not be familiar with the EFSA podcasts? And what are the pros and cons of this strategy?
Yes, thanks. This is actually a question that will deserve a very long answer, because it's mainly, in a way, one of the pillars of what we do at the COM unit here at EFSA, right? So discussing different strategies, different tools, different approaches to reaching different audiences. When it comes to the general public, as already has been mentioned also by some of my colleagues before, we have different tools at our disposal that we use from a very long time now. Some of them are, for instance, social media, which has also been mentioned in the question. For social media, we are very active, really active on Twitter, LinkedIn, and now also on Instagram. If you don't follow us on these channels, I will invite you to take a look. For instance, to Twitter, where we don't only have our main account, but also thematical ones. So, for instance, if you are particularly interested on, let's say, animal welfare and animal health, you have our EFSA Animals Twitter account, where we go very much into details. But if we come back to the general public, I will definitely recommend you to go to our main one. LinkedIn is also very powerful. We've noticed that it's very good to connect in with communities. Obviously, already with some sort of previous interest is easier, but we have realized that it has quite a great exposure. And Instagram, if you wish, will be, let's say, it's the newest one for us, the newest tool, and also it's quite innovative for us because we have taken here a different approach. It's not EFSA's account, it's a joint account with other sister agencies, as we call them. So some other European agencies that work in related topics as we do. And this is a very powerful tool to reach in a more visual manner, with a more, let's say, casual or friendly, user-friendly, let's say, language with audiences. So that's definitely another option. And then I won't go into details discussing about the campaigns, because you heard about that a little bit already. But the campaigns, they have also this very powerful this setting in which you can decide whom you want to target. So sometimes we go for a more general public, like an EU chooses say food campaign, whereas sometimes we decide to go for more, let's say, targeted audiences who will be maybe not necessarily interested in food safety, which could be, I don't know, for instance, hunters. Hunters, for instance, is a good one for African swine fever, which is one of the campaigns we work on. And why is that? Why are we talking to hunters? Because hunters, they are very much in contact with wild boars, and wild boars are unfortunately one of the animals very much affected by this disease, and a factor of its spread. So I hope I gave you a fair idea of what we do, although, as I say, this is really something we could be discussing for hours, really.
That was a really wide question, actually. So last two questions also for Vincenzina. First one, we saw the information provided impacted consumers' acceptance. Are there studies evaluating the effects of information in the long term?
No, actually, this is a very good question, right? Also because we know nowadays that preferences evolve over time, and so how can this be captured? And this is one of the limitations that we have every time. We do experiments, but then it's only one experiment, one time, and things can change over time, especially with food innovations. So this study was done in 2019, where the market share was extremely low, but then from 2019 to 2022, we've seen a 43% market share increase, right? So, there's been something there that our data did not capture well. And so, how can academia, right, solve this issue? Obviously, using tracking surveys, right? So you do surveys over time for like 2-3 years, and you track whether those preferences change. So I recently got this USDA NIFA project here. And in this project, it is actually also in collaboration with other scientists from Europe. What we will do is we will run a monthly survey for 3 years on food innovation and how trust in science will affect acceptance of food innovations, and how acceptance will change over time. And this is obviously done because we know that preferences evolve over time and they are not stable.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And another one for you. Could you go more in details about the environmental concerns that you have, let's say, investigated about plant-based products? For instance, regarding the resources needed to make plant-based products, don't they have a lower conversion factor than the animal counterparts?
So I think that there is more research needed in this domain, and many researchers just focused on land use, water usage, and obviously it only considers, right, what is right now used for conventional meat versus nothing, right? But then I think that more research is needed to see what is happening, because obviously, we say it's a 43% increase of market share, but compared to conventional meat, still the market share of plant-based meat alternatives is very low, maybe 3%. And so if you scale up and you want to get even like 20%, there will be different resources that will be used, right? So there will be new factories, there will be new land used. So what is the land that will be used for this type of production is still unknown, at least here in the States. I don't know if in Europe the situation is different. And so those questions remain, right? And there have been a number of people I know that are now investigating in those emerging environmental concerns, but there is no data, right, available, also because it's just at the beginning of the production system. On the nutritional aspect, health aspect, right, that is already visible. Now, obviously, what are the effects on health? It's still unclear, right, because we don't have data on that as well. But if you look at even just the list of ingredients, it's massive, right? It's 21 ingredients versus 2 ingredients. And so if you also think about that in terms of clean labels, which is a trend among consumers, that could also pose a number of challenges. But more research, I think, needs to be done in this domain. And this is not to say that plant meat alternatives are not good. It's just to say that we need to apply a holistic approach, right, to really evaluate environmental impacts associated with these 2 different production systems.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there are a few more questions, but eventually you can answer directly on the chat with that. And let's say I can conclude this morning session congratulating and thanking all the speakers, because I think all the presentations were really interesting, and I congratulate with you. I also thank the EFSA collaborators for organizing the logistics.